Hi guys, my name is Vivek and in this video tutorial we are going to talk about flat file validation. Guys, I have a quick request. If you have not subscribed to my channel already, please go ahead and do it now so that you get a notification as soon as I upload a new video tutorial. Now let's go ahead and discuss what are flat files and why their validation is so important. So flat files are actually very commonly used to transfer data between internal and external systems. So you have your OLTP system that feeds to your ODS, your warehouse, your marts. The transfer between your OLTP system and these decision support systems are actually done through flat files. Now what are the common type of flat files that are used? The most common type of flat file that you hear of is comma separated file. So here in this particular example, I have a file with 3 columns that have value 1, 2, 3 and they are separated by comma. So a file where the columns are separated by comma is known as comma separated file. Another file which is commonly used is tab delimited file. So again here I have 3 columns 1, 2, 3 separated by tab. This is actually the most common file used across industry and that is pipe delimited. Guys, in majority of the project that I have worked, I have seen that everybody uses pipe delimited file. So again I have my 3 columns 1, 2, 3 separated by pipe. Now as I mentioned that flat files are very commonly used to exchange data between internal and external system. It is of vital importance that you validate the data that is coming as a part of your flat file is correct or not. For example, if you are setting up a new process where you will be receiving data from a source system through flat files, you need to validate what kind of data you will be receiving. So let's go ahead and understand what exactly should be your validation strategy for flat files. The first thing that you should validate is what is the name of the file that you will be receiving and what is the expected size, and I will tell you in a moment why exactly this is so important. Then we are going to talk about the column length validation and data type validation. Now the files that we are getting will be loaded in our tables, so we need to make sure that we opt for the right data type and we actually choose the correct column length and that kind of stuff. Another important thing to note here is that in industries usually you have headers and footers associated with your flat files. Header usually contains the column names, though they can be customized, but usually I've seen is that the header column contains the column names of the content of the files, and footer or trailer record usually contains the count of rows in the file. So if your count of file does not match with your trailer, you should go ahead and inform that to your source system that you know what, the trailer says that the file should have 500 records while I only got 15 records as a part of my file. Is there a problem? So you need to validate that kind of stuff. Then as we discussed, the most common delimiter used in case of flat files is pipe. There is a possibility that one of the column may have data as pipe. So that is going to cause column skew, and we will understand in a moment what exactly is this and how we can go ahead and tackle this or why we should go ahead and validate this kind of stuff. Another important thing is there is a possibility that we have defined certain columns as not null in my table, but my flat file may have those columns as null. So we need to make sure that if there is a column that is defined as not null, it should not have any null values in my flat file. The same goes for primary key and unique key values as well. If I have primary key or unique columns defined on a particular column, it should not have any duplicate values. Another thing that is important is foreign key relationship validation. For example, you are getting sales data from your different regions and a product that is not part of your product table was being sold. For example, these dimension tables and fact tables are actually populated from different systems. For any reason the dimension job failed and the new product did not enter my dimension table, but my fact table had that particular data as a part of new file. So we need to make sure that that particular fact data does not enter my transaction table. So we need to maintain that foreign key relationship validation. Another important thing is regular expression validation. For example, I have a column email. There is a prerequisite that it should contain @ symbol. If that's not the case, it's an invalid email. The same goes for phone number as well. It should be all numeric and it should be of 10 length, that kind of stuff. So you can actually go ahead and configure regular expression to validate that the data you are receiving in your flat file is correct or not. And finally, this is another thing which is very important. What's the frequency of the file? So let's take a situation where I'm receiving file from my source system every hour and for some reason my previous job failed. my database was down, I could not load the previous file. In that case, what exactly should I do? Should I load the previous file first before loading the next file? Should I append both those files, or should I just load the latest file? Those kind of things I need to validate, or I need to go ahead and ask my source team, or I need to go ahead and ask my architect before designing my system. So let's go ahead and understand all these things in details. Let's start with the name attribute. For example, my source team said that they are going to send us a file named sales.txt. Now, especially when you are working in Unix, you have to be very careful of the lowercase and uppercase as well. For example, I have three files here, sales.txt with capital S, then I have another files where everything is in caps, and then I have another files where I have .txt in caps. So these three will be treated as three different files. So I need to be really particular when I'm asking my source team that what will be the exact name of my file. Now, usually in a real-time project, you want to retain this particular file. For example, in my previous scenario, as I mentioned, that I'm receiving a file on an hourly basis, or on a daily basis, or on a weekly basis. If I don't concatenate that particular file with a variable, with a timestamp, with a batch ID, that file will be overwritten, and there will be no way I can go back in time and see what was my data in past. So usually what happens is I concatenate a timestamp or a batch ID with my file name. For example, if I talk about this particular file, it actually tells me that this particular sales file was received on 2nd March. Now there is another important thing. Let's say that my source team says that they are going to attach a date along with the file name, and so that you can uniquely retain these files for a longer time, as long as you want. I need to make sure what exactly will be the format of the date, whether it will be just date or whether it will be timestamp or that kind of stuff, because when I configure my regular expression, I will configure it accordingly. For example, if they are just going to send the dates, that means the length of this particular variable will be 8. If they are going to send the timestamp as well, it's going to get extended, and that kind of stuff. So whenever we are configuring or dealing with flat files, we should have these things clear beforehand. What will be the exact name of the flat file, or if we go ahead and plan to add a batch ID with it or a timestamp with it, what exactly will be the format of that particular thing, so that whenever I go ahead and try to read that particular file, I don't have any issues. So this is the first thing that you want to validate. The second thing you want to validate is the size of the file. For example, if you are receiving 0 KB file, that means there is no data in that particular file. You should ask your source team that whether there is a possibility that I can receive 0 KB file, or what exactly should be my action. Should I go ahead and send you an intimation mail that I have received a 0 KB file? Or there is another scenario. At times what happens is, when the file does not have any data, the source system will not send the file at all. So you should go ahead and ask this kind of question. So if there is no data, whether you are going to send a blank file or whether you are not going to send a file at all. Usually the source system will send 0 KB file or blank file, so that our system can understand that there was no technical glitch in transfer of the file. This is as expected, and this file was supposed to be blank. So you should go ahead and validate that kind of stuff, that what exactly will happen if you are having blank file. Another important thing is that when you are working on a real project, you actually know beforehand what kind of data you should go ahead and expect. For example, I expect that in my project I will be receiving 1 million rows as a part of this file on a daily basis. So for a particular day, if I receive a file which is in KBs, that means there is a possibility that the entire data was not sent and the file was corrupted. So you need to actually configure your job in a way that it tackles these kind of situation. It should see that if it's a 0 KB file, it should go ahead and send an intimation email to the source team asking whether that is correct or not, or just intimating maybe that we received a 0 KB file. If the size of the file is below the threshold, you should consider the file as corrupted, and you should again drop an intimation mail to the source team that we received a file which is actually below the expected size, whether this is expected or something was corrupted, that kind of stuff. And I used to work on a system, and guys, this was long back, and that system could handle full refresh and incremental refresh as well. The only challenge was that we were not certain whether we will receive full refresh file or incremental refresh files. So what we did is, we actually set a check that before deciding whether to run a full refresh or incremental refresh, the size of these files will be evaluated. If it's greater than 5 GB, we will go ahead and run a full refresh. If it's less than 5 GB, we will go ahead and run the incremental refresh. So what happens, sometimes the source data was changed considerably and the size of the files were huge. In that case, our incremental approach would have taken a lot of time. So instead of loading the data incrementally, we were doing full refresh in that kind of cases. But yeah, you need to make sure that you know your files, what's their name, what's their size, and that kind of stuff. And guys, another important tip at this point of time is your system should be designed in a way that it should actually handle both incremental refresh or full refresh. For example, you were doing incremental refresh over a period of time and some of the data was corrupted, then you should have that capability that you will do a full refresh and the entire data will be corrected. Obviously, this does not apply to systems that have terabytes of data. I'm talking about small ODS or small OLTP system which only have a few gigabytes or less data. Next thing you want to validate is column length or data type validation. For example, in my table I have defined a column of length 200. Even in my ETL job, I have configured the length of that particular column as 200. Now when I receive the file, I receive certain column values where the length is 400. Now what exactly should happen in this particular case? Should I go ahead and discard this particular row, or should I truncate the values to 200 characters and report it to my source team that, you know what, the data was truncated or that kind of stuff? So you should validate this kind of stuff. For example, if you receive data where the length is more than what is defined in your ETL job or table, what exactly should happen? You should go ahead and ask these questions. Another important thing is, for example, I have an ID column defined in my table that only has numeric values. Now my flat file has certain varchar values for this particular field. What exactly should happen? Should I go ahead and fail my entire job, or should I reject this particular row and go back to my source system and say that, you know what, today you sent 10 rows where the ID column was varchar, whether this was a mistake or what exactly happened, that kind of stuff. Another important thing, guys, is date column. So you have a column which is defined as date in your table. Now whenever we are talking about flat files, it actually is treated as varchar. So you can store data in whatever format you want. But when you go ahead and load this particular data in your table using your ETL job, if the date column has data in various formats, you will have certain challenges. So you should go ahead and check this with your source team, that what will be the date format, and it should be consistent across the entire column. The other thing we talked about is header and footer validation. As I mentioned, header columns usually contain the column names and the footer columns usually contain the count of the rows in that particular file, or it also contains the checksum value. So what happens, you have actually configured an algorithm using which you are creating a checksum for that particular file, or what you are doing is you are simply storing the count of that particular file. Now if the count of the file does not match with the trailer record, or if your calculated checksum does not match with the checksum that is being part of the file, you should go ahead and report this to your source system that the file that was sent over SFTP is corrupted, you didn't receive the correct data. So this is another important thing. Whenever you are doing flat file validation, you should go ahead and verify these things. You should go ahead and verify that the footer record actually reflects the correct snapshot of the file. Another very common problem, guys, is if you have delimiter in data. Now let's go ahead and understand what exactly this means. So I have a source file that is pipe delimited. It has 3 columns, col1, col2 and col3. This is my header record, col1, col2, col3, and this is my data 1, 2, 3 that is being separated by pipe. Now the second row I have is, the problem here with col2 is that col2 actually contains pipe as a part of this data. So this particular entire text is column 2. Now what exactly will happen when I go ahead and try to load this using SQL Loader, Informatica or any ETL tool? There will be an index queuing and the output in table will be, instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, I will have the output as 1, 2, 3. So this particular value is lost. And guys, this is a very simple example of index queuing where you lost the data. Obviously in this particular case the job should have failed, but a lot of time because you have delimiter in your data, your job fails because of different reason. For example, the column from flat file which is date should be populated in your date column of the table as well, but because of indexing, now the ETL job is trying to populate the date column in an integer value, which is going to cause failures. So you need to be really careful, and you need to go back to your source system, or you need to design your ETL job in a way that if there is a probable column where you can receive delimiter as a part of your data, you should go ahead and fix that. You should go ahead and replace that particular delimiter character with a space or any other value. And guys, this actually happens in a lot of projects, so you want to be proactive in removing these delimiters, or you should go ahead and demand this from your source team that no delimiter should be sent as a part of the data, and if you plan to send it, you should have double quotes or single quotes associated with that particular column. So for those of you who are familiar with Informatica, I'm sure you would have come across scenarios where you had your delimiter in data. The only solution in that particular case is replacing that particular delimiter with space or any other value, or you have double quotes or single quotes on that particular column. The other thing that I wanted to discuss is not null column or primary key unique key violation. So here I have a table with 3 columns, column 1, column 2 and column 3. I have defined column 1 as a primary key and column 2 as a unique key. Now the data that I'm receiving from my flat file is column 1, column 2, column 3, that's the header, and the first record is correct, it has 1, 2, 3, but in the second record I don't have any value corresponding to col 1. That means I have a null value, and because of this I will have a violation, and this particular row will be dropped, or it will lead to a failure. My third row is correct, it has data 239, that means my primary key and unique key is not violated. But in my fourth row, I'm getting 3 again, which will lead to unique constraint violation. So I need to make sure that I validate my flat file so that I don't have these kind of issues. If I have a row that is actually breaching my primary key constraint or unique constraint violation, I should go ahead and store that in a reject table and report it to my source system that, you know what, you sent me 1,000,000 records today. Out of that, 1,000 records had issues. 500 had primary key violation and the other 500 were resulting in unique key violation. You should go ahead and fix your source system and resend me this particular data. Then we talked about foreign key relationship validation. You have a transaction table that has a foreign key on products table. Now the transaction flat file has product P10, while this particular product has not entered my dimension products table. So what exactly should happen in this particular scenario? Should I drop this particular record and repopulate it later, or should I go ahead and insert this record in my transaction table? But whenever I do reporting and I try to join my transaction table with my dimension table, that particular record will be dropped. So you have to ask this particular questions when you're dealing with flat files. Usually what I've seen is, if there is a case like this, and guys, this is a very common case, it happens. For example, there will be employees who will join the organization and on the same day they will do certain sales, but the employee ID in the dimension table will be populated at the later stage, but we will get their sales data. So what exactly we do is we park those particular records for later processing, and when we receive the dimensional data which was leading to the drops, after that we will go ahead and reprocess those particular sales. So this is a very common scenario that happens, that you will have a foreign key constraint violation. So instead of rejecting those particular records, you can go ahead and park those particular records and reprocess them as a part of batch process. For example, if you still don't have that dimensional data, you will park them again and they will be processed at a later stage. And guys, in the previous projects where I've worked, we had processes like this, where we had certain data that would have been dropped because of absence of dimension tables. We used to park it and later process it as a part of batch process. Another important validation that I want to talk about is regular expression validation. As I mentioned that I have an email column, I have a phone number column, or I have a SSN column. So there are predefined values that these columns can take. For example, phone number must be of 10 digits and it should contain only integers and no alphabets. So I will go ahead and configure a regular expression to validate this particular scenario in my ETL job. If I receive alphabet for this particular column as a part of my flat file, I will go ahead and reject that particular record and report it back to my source system that, you know what, the phone number for this particular employer customer was incorrect. Please go ahead and correct it. Similarly for email as well, email must have @. If it doesn't have @, I will go ahead and report to my source system that these many emails that you sent today were not correct. Because of that, the entire record were rejected, and you need to go ahead and send me those record again. So whenever you plan a project, you have that feedback mechanism between your source system and your target system, that if you are rejecting certain records in your target, you will go ahead and feed that data back to your source system for correction. They will go ahead and remediate that data on their end. Some of the projects don't have an automated process. There you will have a business analyst who will validate the rejected records and go ahead and manually report that to your source system. Some of the projects that are relatively advanced will have a feedback mechanism where all these rejected records will be supplied back to your source system, and they will go ahead and figure out on their own. The final important thing that I want to talk about is frequency. Let's go ahead and understand this with a scenario. For example, I received a file at 6 p.m. Now the job that was supposed to process this particular file failed for some reason. For example, the Informatica job failed because the integration service was down, or it could not connect to the database, or for any reason that particular job failed. Now you received another file at 6:30 p.m. Now what exactly you should do? Should you process this 6 p.m. file first and then later process the 6:30 p.m. file? Should you append these two files together and then process them together, or should we just consume the file 2 because it has data from file 1 as well? So these are the kind of questions that you should ask when you're doing flat file validation, both from developer and tester perspective as well. Guys, this is one tutorial that is equally relevant for business analyst, ETL developer and ETL tester, or anybody who is working on data warehousing and business intelligence, because flat files are very commonly used to transfer the data, and you will often come across these questions in your project. So guys, that will be it for this particular tutorial. If you have any doubts or questions, just drop in a comment and I will try to answer them as soon as possible. Thanks a lot guys for watching this particular tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.